Today, I want to tell you the story of Mario Eno, Pablo Escobar's most trusted man. Someone who dared to steal $6 million, thinking he could outsmart the most cunning drug lord Colombia has ever seen. What happened next left everyone in shock. Subscribe to the channel, and let us know from where in the world you're listening to this story. The Trust Meeting. Rain pounded fiercely against the windows of the majestic Los Rosales estate as Pablo Escobar stood in his study, gazing out at the lush, soaked landscape of the mountains surrounding Medellin. It was November 1987, and the cool breeze slipping through a slightly open window carried the earthy scent of wet soil and the delicate aroma of perfectly groomed flowers from the gardens. Pablo dressed with effortless elegance, beige linen trousers, a crisp white cotton shirt, and Italian leather loafers. At 38, he was at the height of his power, commanding an empire that stretched from the depths of the Colombian jungle to the avenues of Miami and New York. But that afternoon, his thoughts weren't on smuggling routes or territorial disputes. Something far more delicate occupied his mind, numbers in the monthly reports that didn't add up. Los Rosales was one of his favorite places, a sprawling 60-hectare estate on the outskirts of Envigado, designed for strategic and discreet meetings with key members of his organization. The main house, built in Spanish colonial style, was surrounded by lush gardens where peacocks roamed freely among marble fountains and Italian sculptures. Don Pablo, the voice of Alvaro Herrera, broke his concentration. "Everyone's here. They're waiting in the main hall." Pablo nodded without lifting his eyes from the documents on his mahogany desk. Carefully detailed financial reports with precise records of income and expenses for each operation from the past month. Every shipment, every lab, every distribution point was documented with meticulous accuracy. But there were inconsistencies he couldn't ignore. "Is everyone here?" Pablo asked as he placed the documents into a black leather folder. "Yes, Patron. Don Gustavo arrived about 30 minutes ago. Gonzalo is reviewing some maps on the table." The Ochoa brothers came together. And Don Mario, he was the first to arrive, as usual. Pablo allowed himself a slight smile at the mention of the last name. Mario Eno had been his top ally for the past 5 years, a 42-year-old man known for unwavering loyalty and a sharp administrative mind that had been instrumental in the cartel's expansion. He was famous for his obsessive punctuality and precise handling of financial details. "Perfect. Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes." Pablo walked over to the mirror hanging on the study wall and adjusted the collar of his shirt. That afternoon's meeting was crucial. Each month, his top associates gathered to review operations, discuss strategies, and most importantly, account for the money. It was a ritual that kept the organization running like a perfectly tuned machine. The main hall of Los Rosales was magnificent, reflecting Pablo's taste for both luxury and authority. High ceilings with carved wooden beams, traversed marble floors, and walls adorned with works by renowned Colombian artists created an atmosphere that blended grandeur with warmth. At the center stood a massive solid mahogany conference table surrounded by Italian leather chairs, worth more than most Colombians earned in a year. If the story already has you at the edge of your seat, just imagine what's coming. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next. When Pablo entered, all conversation stopped immediately. 5 men stood almost in unison out of respect for the man who had led them to the pinnacle of power. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," Pablo greeted as he took his seat at the head of the table. "I hope everyone had a comfortable trip." To his right sat Gustavo Gaviria, his cousin and right-hand man, a lean 34-year-old with meticulously trimmed mustache and sharp eyes shaped by a life in the business. On Pablo's left was Mario Eno, impeccably dressed in a dark gray suit and navy blue tie, with a folder full of documents he had been reviewing while waiting. Across from Gustavo sat Gonzalo Rodriguez Gacha, known as the Mexican, a burly 40-year-old with large hands and a presence that commanded instant respect. His nickname came from his passion for Mexican culture and his skill in forging ties with cartels across the border. The group was completed by the Ochoa brothers, Jorge Luis and Juan David, wealthy cattle ranchers who had entered the drug trade with a business-minded approach that meshed perfectly with Pablo's bold leadership. Before we dive into individual reports, Pablo began as he opened his folder. "I want to go over the general numbers from last month. According to my calculations, we should have brought in close to $120 million in gross revenue. Mario quickly opened his own folder and pulled out a sheet with detailed figures. That's correct, Don Pablo. We generated exactly $119.8 million, which represents a 12% increase compared to the previous month. Pablo nodded, his expression unchanged. And operational expenses? $43.2 million. Mario replied without hesitation. That includes salaries, transport, supplies, protection payments, and security costs. So that leaves us with a net profit of $76.6 million, he added with a proud smile. The others exchanged satisfied glances. The numbers were solid, indicating a thriving and financially sound organization. Very well, said Pablo. Now let's go over each operation in detail. Over the next hour, each member presented meticulous reports on their respective areas. Gustavo discussed the transport routes from the labs to the ports. Gonzalo covered operations in Mexico and connections with U.S. distributors. The Ochoas reported on financials and legal investments used to launder money. Pablo listened closely, taking notes and asking pointed questions that revealed his deep understanding of the business. But his focus sharpened when it was Mario Ineo's turn. Don Pablo. Mario began in a professional tone he perfected over the years. The Southern Labs produced 100 kilos of pure cocaine this month. Production costs were $8 million, and the average wholesale price was $1,000 per kilo. Pablo did the mental math instantly. That gives us revenues of $18 million just from that operation. Exactly. With a net profit of $10 million after expenses, Mario confirmed. Pablo continued to jot down notes, but something in the numbers unsettled him. His memory for figures was extraordinary, and a strange pattern was beginning to emerge. Tiny details that didn't quite fit. Mario, can you break down the operating costs of the Southern Labs? Mario reviewed his notes. Chemical reagents, $2.4 million. Salaries, $800,000. Transport, $900,000. Security, $600,000. Miscellaneous, $500,000. Pablo wrote down each figure carefully, his face tightening slightly. Are local authority bribes included in security expenses? Yes, Don Pablo. How much exactly? Mario hesitated briefly before answering. $50, 000 monthly to keep the local police and soldiers happy. Pablo nodded, but internally marked that pause. In 5 years of working together, Mario had never once hesitated when giving figures. All right, Gustavo, tell us about the transport routes. The meeting continued for another hour, each member sharing detailed data. But Pablo had already begun spotting subtle inconsistencies in Mario's reports, seemingly minor discrepancies that, when put together, painted a troubling picture. Once the formal meeting ended, the group dispersed throughout the estate. Some went to relax by the pool, others to the billiard room, and a few strolled through the gardens now that the rain had started to ease. Pablo, however, remained in the main hall, going over his notes and reflecting on everything he had just heard. Mario approached as he carefully organized his own papers. Don Pablo, would you like me to clarify anything about the reports? I have all the backups in my office. Pablo looked up and studied Mario's face. He was a handsome man, well-educated, always impeccably dressed, and respected by everyone in the organization thanks to years of consistent work. To Pablo, he had been like a younger brother, someone he trusted completely, both in logistical matters and more personal affairs. For now, Mario, Pablo replied, but I want you to bring me the original documents related to the Southern Labs expenses tomorrow, especially the invoices for chemical materials and proof of protection payments. Mario nodded without a hint of concern. Of course, Don Pablo. You'll have them on your desk first thing in the morning. Perfect. Will you stay for dinner? I'd love to, but I have a meeting tonight with suppliers in Barranquilla. You know how they are. If you're late, they think you don't value them. Pablo smiled. I understand. Go ahead, but tomorrow no excuses. I want to see those documents. Mario said goodbye and left the room. Pablo remained seated, watching the last raindrops trace patterns across the window pane. A sense of unease settled in his gut. that sharp intuition he had learned to trust after so many years in a treacherous world. The numbers Mario had presented were technically plausible, yet something in the way he delivered them didn't match the razor-sharp precision that had always defined him. Tiny discrepancies that, when added up, could mean a difference of millions. Pablo closed the folder and headed to his private study. That night, he intended to go over all of Mario's reports from the past 3 months. If his suspicions were correct, he was about to uncover that the man he trusted the most had been stealing from him. And if that was true, then Mario Eno was about to learn the hard way that betraying Pablo Escobar was the worst mistake anyone could make. Numbers don't lie. By dawn the next day, Pablo Escobar was still awake in his private office, surrounded by scattered papers spread across a side table he had turned into a makeshift war room. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the linen curtains, casting a soft play of light and shadow that contrasted with the desk lamps that had fueled 6 intense hours of analysis. Pablo had barely slept 2 hours. His mind, trained for logic and numbers, wouldn't let him rest since he had noticed the first irregularities in Mario's reports. He started by reviewing last month's data, but quickly realized he needed to widen the scope to clearly identify the emerging pattern. Before him lay 3 months of financial reports, meticulously organized in columns by date. Every operation, every movement, every expense was logged with the obsessive precision that had made his organization unstoppable. But now, looking at all the data together, the discrepancies stood out like flashing warning lights. Don Pablo, a gentle voice interrupted his concentration. It was Maria, the estate's longest-serving and most trusted housekeeper. "Would you like me to bring you some breakfast? You've been working all night." Pablo looked up from the papers, noticing for the first time that the sunlight had fully replaced the artificial light. "Yes, Maria. A strong coffee, no sugar, and maybe some toast with butter. But first, please get in touch with Alvaro. I need to speak with him immediately." "Of course, Patron." Pablo leaned back in his leather chair and pressed his temples with his fingers, trying to ease the pressure he felt. The figures he had been reviewing throughout the night didn't just confirm his suspicions. They made them worse. Mario hadn't just been deceiving him. He had been doing so consistently, meticulously, for at least 3 months, maybe more. The system was brilliant in its simplicity. Mario had been inflating the operational costs of the Southern Labs, adding small but frequent amounts, $2,000 here, $300,000 there, always strategically distributed among different expense categories, so that no single figure would raise suspicion. 5 minutes later, Alvaro appeared at the study door, still a bit groggy but with alert eyes. "Good morning, Don Pablo. Maria told me it was urgent." "Take a seat, Alvaro. We have a serious matter on our hands." Pablo handed him a sheet of paper where he had summarized the findings he'd compiled during the night. "Look, these numbers are the discrepancies I found between Mario's reports and the actual data I have from other sources." Alvaro examined the document, and his expression changed as he read. As the cartel security chief, he understood perfectly what those figures meant. "Don Pablo, this adds up to more than $4 million in just 3 months." "Exactly. And that only covers the discrepancies I was able to confirm last night. If we expand the review to previous months, we could be talking about a much higher sum." Alvaro looked up, concerned. "What do you want me to do?" Pablo stood and walked to a window overlooking the gardens. Outside, the peacocks had begun to roam among the marble fountains, and the gardeners were starting their workday. Everything seemed in order, but he knew that apparent calm was about to break. "First, I want you to verify these numbers yourself. Contact the managers of the Southern Labs. Talk to the chemical suppliers. Confirm how much has been paid in bribes. But do it very carefully. Mario must not find out we're investigating him." "Understood." "Yes, boss. Anything else?" "Yes. I need you to track Mario's spending habits over the past few months. Has he bought property? Made investments? Had unusual personal expenses? He diverted $4 million. That money has to be somewhere." Alvaro stood to leave, but Pablo stopped him before he reached the door. "One more thing, Alvaro. This stays between us. No one else is to know anything until we have conclusive proof. Mario has been like a brother to me these past 5 years. If I'm wrong, I'll destroy a relationship I deeply value. But if I'm right, Pablo didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't have to. Alvaro understood perfectly. In Pablo Escobar's world, betrayal had only one consequence, no matter how close the relationship. At exactly 10 o'clock, Mario and now arrived at the Rosales estate with the punctuality that had always defined him. He wore a perfectly pressed navy blue suit and carried a black leather briefcase with the documents Pablo had requested the day before. "Good morning, Don Pablo," he greeted with a calm smile, the kind of smile worn by someone who apparently has nothing to hide. "I brought everything you asked for, the original invoices, the wire transfer receipts, the payment records. It's all here." Pablo was seated behind his desk, watching him with a penetrating gaze that Mario interpreted as the usual professional intensity. "Perfect, Mario. Have a seat. Let's go through this step by step." Over the next hour, Mario presented each document with the same diligence he had always shown. The invoices for the chemical supplies were organized chronologically. The transfer receipts had proper stamps and signatures. Even the records for illegal payments included the signatures of the corrupt officials who had accepted the money. Pablo examined every paper with extreme care, asking specific questions and jotting down notes in his notebook. To any outsider, it would have seemed like a routine audit of the organization's books. But Pablo wasn't conducting just any review. He was looking for something very specific. Inconsistencies between what Mario had submitted and the numbers he had reported the day before. "This invoice for chemical products," Pablo said, holding up a document, "shows an amount of $2,200,000. But yesterday you told me the chemical materials expense was $2,400,000. Mario quickly skimmed his notes. "Ah, yes. There was an additional invoice that came in after I prepared the report. It should be in here somewhere." He rummaged through his briefcase. "Here it is, $200,000 for a rush shipment of acetone. We need it urgently." Pablo took the extra document and examined it carefully. At first glance, it seemed completely legitimate. Letterhead paper, chemical company stamps, authorized signatures. However, there was an intangible detail that unsettled him, though he couldn't yet pinpoint what it was. "And this protection payment receipt, it says $50,000, which matches what you told me yesterday." "That's right, Don Pablo. Complete accuracy in the numbers, as always." Pablo continued reviewing each document. Every piece of evidence Mario provided seemed to perfectly align with his previous reports. If Pablo hadn't had independent sources with which he had cross-checked the data overnight, he might have concluded that his suspicions were unfounded. It was then he realized the true scale of the scheme. Mario hadn't just been inflating numbers in his reports. He had also fabricated documents to back them up. The additional invoices, the bank receipts, even the bribery acknowledgments. All of it had been forged with care to construct an apparently flawless paper trail that concealed the embezzlement. "Mario," Pablo said, firmly closing the document folder, "I want you to clarify something for me." "Of course, Don Pablo. Yesterday you told me that the monthly payments to local authorities in the Southern Lab region amount to $250,000. Is that correct?" "Yes, that's right. They're included in the security expenses I reported." Pablo opened a notebook where he had jotted down key data the night before. "Interesting, because last night I spoke directly with the police commander in that region. He told me he receives $100,000 a month and that the officers under his command receive a total of about $125,000 more." Mario's face began to lose color. "I also spoke with the colonel in charge of the military detachment. He confirmed he gets $50,000 each month." Pablo calmly closed the notebook and locked eyes with Mario. "That adds up to $225,000, not $250,000. Where are the missing $25,000, Mario?" Mario audibly swallowed. "Don Pablo, it's possible I made a mistake in the calculations. Maybe I included some minor expenses." "A mistake?" Pablo interrupted coldly. "In 5 years working by my side, you've never made a $5,000 mistake. Not even 25 cents. The silence that followed was crushing. Mario stared at his hands. Clearly desperate, searching for a plausible explanation. And that brings me to another point, Pablo continued. This acetone invoice for $2 million. Can you tell me the name of the company listed as a supplier? Mario glanced at the paper. Pacific Industrial Chemicals, Don Pablo. Curious, because that company declared bankruptcy 6 months ago. I know that very well. I was one of their main clients. This time, the silence in the room was so dense it could be felt in the air. Mario was visibly sweating, his hands trembling as he tried to rearrange the documents in front of him. Mario, Pablo said with a calmness more terrifying than a scream, I want you to look me in the eyes and tell me the truth. Have you been stealing from me? Mario slowly raised his gaze to meet Pablo's sharp eyes. In that moment, both knew there was no room left for lies. Don Pablo, I can explain. I don't want justifications, Mario. I want a direct answer. Yes or no? Have you been skimming money behind my back? Mario's words came out like a defeated sigh. Yes. Pablo nodded slowly, as if he'd been expecting that confession all along. How much? Around $6 million in the last 8 months. Pablo felt the blood rush to his head, but his face remained composed. And what did you plan to do with that money? I plan to return it, Don Pablo. I made some investments that went bad. I lost money that wasn't mine, and I thought I could recover it quickly and pay everything back before you noticed. Pablo rose slowly and walked around the desk until he stood in front of Mario. Do you know what hurts me the most about all this, Mario? Mario shook his head, unable to speak. It's not the money. Millions of dollars is a huge amount, yes, but it won't ruin me. What really hurts is that you, who were my most trusted man after Gustavo, thought you could fool me, that for 8 months you played a game to see if I'd catch on. Pablo returned to his seat, his expression tightly controlled. Did you really believe I was so stupid that I wouldn't notice you were stealing from me right under my nose? The shame on Mario's face was complete. Not only had he been unmasked as a thief, but also as someone who had deeply underestimated the intelligence of the man who had built one of the most complex and feared criminal empires on the planet. Tomorrow, Pablo finally said, there will be a special meeting with all the organization's leaders. And you, Mario, are going to be there. You'll be there so everyone can hear directly from you what you've been doing and what's going to happen to you. Mario understood immediately that this meeting would be nothing short of his sentencing. In Pablo Escobar's world, stealing from the cartel was an unforgivable offense, no matter the reasons or the personal ties. For now, Pablo continued, I want you to go home, hug your wife, your children, and think carefully about what you're going to say tomorrow, because those will be the most important words you ever speak in your life. Mario left the study with an unsteady gait, while Pablo remained in his chair, overwhelmed by a mix of betrayal, sadness, and rage he hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just about financial loss. He had lost a brother, the public judgment. The conference room at the Los Rosales estate had never witnessed a meeting like the one about to begin. It was noon the next day, and the November sunlight filtered through the silk curtains, casting shadows and light that seemed to foreshadow the gravity of the event to come. Pablo had issued an extraordinary summons. In 5 years since the formalization of his organizational structure, he had never called such an emergency meeting. The message had been direct and forceful. Mandatory attendance for all members of the inner circle. No explanations, no details, just one phrase. We have a matter of trust to resolve. 15 men sat around the large mahogany table, each representing a key component of Escobar's empire. In addition to the usual members of the inner circle, there were also regional security chiefs, heads of the most important labs, and managers of the most sensitive distribution routes. The tension was palpable. Conversations were scarce and whispered. Everyone could sense something unusual was about to happen. Never in all those years of monthly meetings had Pablo gathered so many people for an unscheduled session. Mario Ineo sat in his usual seat to Pablo's left, but he was unrecognizable. His normally immaculate suit was visibly wrinkled from a sleepless night. His eyes were bloodshot, and his hands trembled slightly as he leafed through some documents he clearly wasn't reading. "Good morning, gentlemen," Pablo began, his voice slicing through the murmur like a sharp blade. Thank you for coming on such short notice. I know many of you had to cancel important matters to be here. He stood and began walking slowly around the table, locking eyes with each person present. This meeting is unlike any we've had before. We're not here to evaluate results. We're not here to plan strategies. And we're certainly not here to share good news. Pablo stopped behind Gonzalo Rodriguez Gotcha's chair and rested both hands on the backrest. We're here because one of those present has violated the most sacred principle of our organization. Someone in this room has betrayed the trust we all placed in him. Silence fell. Not a breath could be heard. Everyone understood they were witnessing a moment they'd never forget. For the past 5 years, Pablo continued, resuming his walk. We've built something unique. Not just a profitable operation, but a true brotherhood built on trust, unconditional loyalty, and the certainty that betraying this organization, he paused, is the same as betraying a family. Yesterday, I confirmed that one of us has been stealing money. And I'm not talking about accounting errors, misunderstandings, or administrative chaos. I'm talking about deliberate, consistent, and meticulously executed theft. Pablo turned and faced the table with a steely gaze. $6 million. That's the amount that has slowly left our pockets over the last 8 months. $6 million that ended up in the hands of someone who promised us loyalty. The table erupted in murmurs. Expressions of shock and outrage spread like wildfire. Even for an operation as vast as Pablo's, that sum was a serious offense. But the money, Pablo said, raising his voice to regain control of the room, is not what matters most. What truly matters is that this man believed he was smart enough to fool us. He thought he could build a web of lies, forged invoices, and falsified receipts, and that no one would notice. He returned to his place, but didn't sit. He rested his hands on the back of his chair and fixed his gaze directly on Mario Ineo. He thought I wasn't intelligent enough to check the numbers. He thought you wouldn't be discerning enough to ask questions. He thought he could move us like chess pieces at will. Mario kept his eyes fixed on the table. He didn't dare look up. He knew every eye in the room was on him. Mario, Pablo said, and his tone had the weight of a military order. Mario slowly stood, visibly shaken. He could barely stay upright. The contrast between the confident man of previous days and the broken figure now trembling on his feet was staggering. Tell everyone what you confessed to me yesterday. Mario looked around the table, searching each face for a sign of solidarity, some small gesture of comfort. But all he found were hardened faces of disillusioned men. Men who had once considered him a brother now saw him for what he truly was, a traitor. I started, Mario began in a trembling voice. Louder, ordered Pablo. I want everyone to hear it clearly. Mario took a breath and forced his voice louder. For the past 8 months, I've been taking money from the organization. Taking? Pablo interrupted sarcastically. What a fancy way to put it. Say it like it is. I've been stealing money from the organization. How much? Approximately $6 million. The murmur that swept through the room was like a restrained roar. The men weren't just offended. They felt betrayed. These were men who had risked their lives, spent years away from their families, constantly pursued by authorities, all to uphold the structure Mario had been quietly undermining from within. And explain to them how you pulled it off, Mario, Pablo said. I want everyone to hear your brilliant system. Mario began describing his method in a flat, robotic tone, padding operational costs, forging invoices, altering bank transfer slips. With each detail, the faces around the table grew colder, harder, more unforgiving. Gustavo Gaviria was the first to speak. Mario, do you have any idea what $6 million means to us? Do you know how many lives were put at risk to generate that money? Jorge Luis Ochoa stood up, furious. I trusted you with my finances. I shared confidential information with you thinking you were part of the family. How many times did you go through my numbers looking for ways to take advantage too? Voices began rising from all sides. Everyone present had personal reasons to feel wounded by Mario. They had confided secrets in him, supported him in critical decisions, defended his judgment in key discussions. Pablo watched in silence as Mario shrank under the collective judgment. Several minutes passed before Pablo raised a hand to silence the room. "Is there anything else they should know about Mario?" he asked, stepping in front of him. "Yesterday, when I confronted him, do you know what his first reaction was? It wasn't to apologize. It wasn't to admit his wrongdoing. The first thing he did was try to justify himself by saying he planned to return the money. He turned to the group, as if this were just about numbers, as if an apology and a bank transfer could fix everything, as if he could betray us for 8 months and then pretend nothing happened. Pablo faced Mario again and looked him straight in the eye. "But what offends me the most isn't the betrayal. It's not even the theft. It's that you actually believed I wouldn't notice. Did you really think that after building this entire empire from scratch, after handling million-dollar operations, I wouldn't notice that something didn't add up?" Mario looked up, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Don Pablo, I never meant to—" "Never meant to what?" Pablo cut him off harshly. "You never meant for me to find out. You never meant to betray me. Never meant to steal from your own brothers." Pablo leaned in until their faces were inches apart. "Or maybe you never meant for it to be so easy?" The question hung in the air like a verdict. Everyone understood. Mario wasn't sorry for crime, only for getting caught. "I want this to be absolutely clear to everyone," Pablo declared as he moved to the center of the room. Mario didn't make a mistake. This wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a choice. For 8 months, every single day, he chose to steal from us. Every time he sat in that chair, he did, so knowing he was lying to us. Every report he handed, it was a carefully crafted deception. He stopped at the head of the table. And why did he do it? Not out of need, not due to family trouble, not even external pressure. He did it because he thought he could get away with it, because he underestimated every single one of us. The silence was absolute, heavy like a tombstone. Mario still stood, but completely defeated, waiting for the inevitable. Pablo watched him for several long seconds before speaking again. "Mario, for 5 years, you were like a brother to me. I opened the doors to my life, trusted you with my secrets, made you part of my closest circle. I respected you as an ally and valued you as a friend." He paused, pain thick in the air. "And you repaid me by treating me like a fool." He slowly rose again, each word colder than the last. "That's the part I'll never forgive, Mario. Not the money, not the crime. The unforgivable part was thinking I was stupid enough not to realize you were robbing me while smiling in my face." Pablo walked to the window and stared out at the garden in silence. When he turned back around, his face no longer showed sorrow, only the cold, calculated expression of a ruthless strategist. "Mario Ino," he said in a voice that froze the blood of everyone in the room, "you are no longer my right hand. You're no longer part of this organization. After today, you are nothing to any of us." He turned to the door, and just before crossing it, he stopped. "The next time someone asks me about you, I'll tell them Mario Ineo died the day he thought Pablo Escobar was dumb enough not to realize he was being stolen from." The phrase felt like a final sentence. With just a few words, Pablo had reduced a once valuable ally to a symbol of betrayal. 5 years of apparent loyalty were now a warning for all present. As Pablo left without looking back, Mario collapsed into his chair, completely destroyed. No one at the table expressed sympathy. What dominated the air was a cold contempt reserved for those who betray the family's trust. The meeting was over, but Pablo's words would echo through the halls of his empire for a long time. Mario no longer existed, not physically, but in a far more devastating way. He had been erased from history by the man he once called brother. The room remained deathly silent long after Pablo Escobar had left. The 15 most powerful men of the Medellin cartel stared at Mario Ineo, still slumped in his chair, like a puppet with its strings cut. The transformation was so radical it was hard to believe that barely an hour earlier he had been considered Pablo's most loyal right-hand man. Now he was a ghost. Gustavo Gaviria was the first to move. He stood, walked over to Mario with absolute coldness, and picked up the documents Mario had brought. "These papers are no longer your concern," he said in a voice devoid of the affection from years past. "From this moment on, you have no access to any organizational information." One by one, The others rose and left the room. No one said a word. No threats, no goodbyes. They simply ignored him. In Escobar's world, that kind of indifference was more lethal than any physical punishment. Jorge Luis Ochoa, already at the door, turned to Mario one last time. 5 years thinking you were part of the family, he said with disappointment. And now I realize I never really knew you. Gonzalo Rodriguez Gotcha was more direct. Pablo was right. The worst part isn't the money. It's knowing you thought we were all idiots. When the last man left, Mario was completely alone. The same room that had once hosted strategic decisions, celebrations, and moments of brotherhood now felt like a tomb. The silence was so thick Mario could hear his heartbeat. Meanwhile, Pablo walked to the gardens of the Los Rosales estate. His steps were slow but firm. Despite the calm he had shown during the meeting, what had happened shook him to his core. Mario hadn't just been a partner. For 5 years, he had been his confidant, his support. His younger brother, Alvaro, his head of security, approached cautiously. "What do you want us to do with him, Patron?" Pablo stopped beside a marble fountain. The peacocks drank calmly, unaware of the storm that had broken loose. "Nothing," he said after a long pause. "I don't want him touched. No threats. No harm. He's already destroyed. That's enough." "And the money?" Alvaro asked. "We'll recover it," Pablo said confidently. "He has properties, investments, accounts under other names. We'll seize it all. But I don't want physical revenge." Pablo turned to him with a deep stare. "Do you know why I won't kill him?" "No, Patron. Because a dead man becomes a martyr. People forget what he did and only remember how he died. But a man who was publicly shattered, humiliated before those who once respected him, that man becomes a living warning." Pablo smiled with that expression that paralyzes enemies. Mario Ineo will walk the streets of Medellin with his head down. People will point at him. He'll look for work, try to make deals, and everyone will remember he's a guy who stole from Pablo Escobar. He won't find a single soul who trusts him. And he added as he walked toward the main house, That's much slower than a bullet, and far more effective." Back in the conference room, Mario finally managed to stand. His legs trembled, but he knew he couldn't stay there. Every second in that room was torture. He headed for the exit, but stopped when he heard voices in the hallway. He recognized the laughter of the man who had just witnessed his downfall. "Can you believe he thought Pablo wouldn't notice?" one said. 6 million, answered another. And the guy thought fake invoices would fool Pablo. "What gets me is the arrogance," added someone else. After seeing how Pablo controls every cent of this organization, the laughter pierced Mario's heart like knives. He was no longer a person to them. He was a joke, a case study, a warning. He waited until they walked away, then slipped quietly through a side door into the parking lot. His Mercedes-Benz was still there, just as it had been that morning, when he still had hopes of leaving unscathed. He drove silently through the streets of Medellin. When he reached his house in El Poblado, a luxurious mansion bought with dirty money, his wife, Carolina Ineo, was waiting. A refined woman who had lived 5 years of privilege as the wife of the cartel's number 2. "How was the meeting?" she asked with a casual smile. Mario dropped onto the couch, covered his face with his hands, and replied, "Carolina, we need to talk." For an hour, he told her everything. The fraud, the betrayal, the public humiliation. As he spoke, horror and disbelief spread across his wife's face. "You stole $6 million, she whispered when he finished. "I had a plan. I was going to pay it back." "A plan?" she screamed, rising from the couch. "A plan to steal from Pablo Escobar? And you thought he wouldn't notice?" She walked to a window, eyes filled with fury. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You didn't just end your career, Mario. You destroyed all of us, me, our children, our entire family. Who's going to want to deal with us now? Who's going to trust the Ineo name after this?" Mario had no answers. He could only stare into the void, feeling the weight of having ruined not just his life, but the lives of everyone he ever loved. That same night, the story of his fall spread like wildfire throughout the organization. The details of the confession, the meeting, and especially Pablo's final words became legend. In bars frequented by hitmen and accountants' offices in cartel homes, everyone repeated the story, and everyone knew one thing. Mario Ineo had not been executed, but his reputation had been buried deeper than any corpse. Mario Ineo wasn't destroyed by bullets or torture. He was annihilated by something far more enduring: words. Did you hear what Pablo told him? People asked each other. He said that if anyone asks about Mario Ineo, he'll say he died the day he thought Pablo Escobar was dumb enough to be fooled. That phrase didn't just seal his fate. It turned into myth. His betrayal became not just internal news, but eternal warning. In the months that followed, anytime someone inside the organization even considered breaking loyalty, the memory of Mario would rise like a ghost. Not a quick execution, but a slow, public, shameful damnation. Pablo Escobar had created something rare, a punishment more cruel than death, and at the same time more effective than any threat. Mario still breathed. Yes, but in the only world that mattered, the world of power, respect, and belonging, he no longer existed. 2 weeks after the final confrontation, Pablo sat in his study personally reviewing the new audit protocols implemented after the scandal. Alvaro entered quietly, report in hand. Don Pablo. Just as you anticipated, Mario has been trying to find work with other organizations, but no one wants anything to do with him. He also tried to start his own business, but no one wants to partner with him. Pablo nodded. Eyes still on the documents. And the money? We recovered $4.5 million, Alvaro replied. The rest, it seems, he lost in bad investments. As he had said, Pablo finally looked up. Donate that money to foundations in the poorest neighborhoods. If anything good can come of this betrayal, let it be that. He paused, then looked Alvaro straight in the eye. Do you know the difference between killing a traitor and destroying him in front of everyone? No, Patron. When you kill someone, the lesson lasts until people forget. But when you destroy someone with words, when you turn him into a living example of what happens when you betray, that lesson is engraved forever. A cold smile spread across Pablo's face, the one many feared more than a loaded gun. Mario Ineo will walk through Medellin for the rest of his life as a reminder, not of what it means to steal, but of what it means to lose everything. I didn't execute him, Alvaro. I took away what he valued most: his honor, his status, his name. In the years that followed, the name Mario Ineo didn't disappear. It transformed into a symbol. His story was told as a warning to newcomers, repeated in private meetings as a reminder, whispered in hallways whenever someone showed signs of duplicity. Pablo Escobar once again proved that his greatest weapon wasn't guns or millions. It was his deep understanding of the human mind. He didn't need blood to punish. A carefully chosen phrase, a public humiliation, and the silent condemnation of those who once called a traitor brother were enough. Mario Ineo learned in the cruelest way that some mistakes are not paid with life, but with something far more precious: the impossibility of ever living a life worth having again